Well, welcome once again to our service of worship here at Messiah on this fourth Sunday in the season of Easter. And it's one of my favorite Sundays. I mean, how can folks not really resonate with the image of Jesus as the Good Shepherd? It's one that invokes thoughts and feelings of caring, concern, and compassion on the part of God for us, for all of us, no matter our situation, no matter our journey in life. And that's a little bit about what I want to talk about this morning. I want to talk about a journey in life that I think all of us are on, no matter who we are. We share in this one journey together. And I want to speak about it a little bit from my own experience, at least here in the beginning. As many of you know, I grew up in Astoria on the Oregon coast. And in my early, very formative years, preschool, kindergarten, elementary school, I thought Astoria was this amazingly diverse place. I mean, there were forests and mountains and rivers and lakes and streams and the ocean nearby. Amazing diversity of geography. And okay, I agree, the weather was like the same, like 9 months of the year. It was drizzly. And then the sun came out every once in a while after that. But apart from the weather, I thought it was an amazingly diverse place. I think now back a little bit about the naivete I had growing up. I thought Finns and Swedes and Danes and Norwegians and the occasional person from Germany really was what diversity was all about. That there were loggers and fishermen and plywood workers. Now looking back on it, I've learned that this was pretty much what we would call maybe today Scandinavian multiculturalism. The main question people had in terms of distinguishing themselves from one another was, what do you put on your sliced cucumber? That was pretty much how far apart we got from one another in terms of difference. I always loved those little capers on my cucumber and a cracker, but I know the Norwegians did not. I journeyed on in sort of this discovery of diversity in my life. I went to PLU, and yet it was still mainly a Northern European kind of cultural place. It expanded a little bit, I think, from Scandinavia to include some of the rest of Northern Europe. But the questions that people were asking one another, the conversations that we would have, began to involve a little wider range of issues than when I was growing up in my hometown. Questions involving gender and sexuality. I remember sitting at the table in the university center having lunch one day, and the conversation was around unequal pay between men and women, and folks asking themselves, women asking, why is it that I'm afraid to walk out at night alone and you're not? Questions of gender and sexuality began to grow, at least in my consciousness, and that pushed my journey on a little further. The final stop, at least in this part of the journey, was my time in seminary in Chicago. I was sitting with classmates at a wonderful place called Jimmy's Woodlawn Tap. It was a place where seminarians and div school students went to hang out and have a beer and talk about God and life and what the heck is out there for us in our futures. As I was sitting at a table together, I noticed that for the first time in my life that I could remember, the 7 or 8 people sitting at the table, I was the only white person at the table. I was 24, 25 years old. And this was the first time I had that experience. Now, I wasn't really talking. I began to engage less in the conversation. And one of my seminary classmates, a woman who is black, turned to me and said, "Chuck, why so quiet? What's going on? You're usually talking up a storm in class." And I told her, I confessed to her that I'm noticing I'm the only white person here at this table, and I'm feeling a little intimidated. And next to her was another seminary classmate of mine, and she said this to me. She said, "Honey, that's how I feel every day." And she said it with love and compassion and just a bit of edge and anger in her voice. That's how I feel every day. I think, at least this little journey of mine that I have laid out for us is one that many of us have shared in different ways in our lives. The realization that people of color, people of different genders or gender identities, people of a whole host of different backgrounds, not everybody experiences the world the same way. Now, that probably seems maybe even a little bit trite, but it is a point that has been driven home this past year during this time of pandemic, where we have had conversations as a nation about racial injustice and racial inequity, where we have had continuing conversations about what does it mean to be a one people in a diverse nation. What does it mean to live into the depth of this journey of diversity without killing one another? It is something I think we are at a reckoning point with, not just as people who live in the United States, but as Christians, as followers of Jesus. What does it mean to journey into the depths of diversity? Well, I want to just kind of leave that question here for a second and jump into a parallel journey. And these two different journeys go side by side, and in fact, God willing, they may come together at some point. The second journey I want to talk about is one that's laid out for us in Psalm 23. It really is a journey psalm, and I know that it begins with the Lord making us lie down in green pastures, and that doesn't seem to be much of a journey, but that's just the starting point. That's the starting point in Psalm 23 for a discovery of a very simple idea that as we journey through life, there is for us one very simple thing to hang on to. It is the thing that knits and binds everything else together. God satisfies our every need. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not be in want. From the beginning to the end of our life, that is the Lord's desire for us to satisfy our every need. And although we begin lying down in green pastures, we are led then beside still waters, and in and along the journey, our souls are restored. We are guided by God along right pathways. Even when we walk through the valley of the shadow of death, we need not fear any evil, since the Lord, the royal shepherd, is near. And our journey sort of takes its end at a table in which we receive fine things, and the Lord's full grace and mercy is poured among us. Even if enemies are close by, you anoint my head with oil, my cup is running over. Goodness and mercy. And now we get up from the table. Goodness and mercy now follow me the rest of the days of my life, even as I dwell forever in the Lord's house. These two journeys, the one in which the Lord is satisfying our every want, our every need, and this journey of living together and being different here, especially in the States. These two journeys somehow fit together under God's amazing, wonderful, beautiful created order. How do they do that? Where I, as a white man with a fair degree of privilege, can sit at a table with a black woman in Chicago and begin to have some serious conversations about what it means to feel intimidated. How can we do that? These two journeys I'm talking about are knit together in our Lord. In our complex, diverse world where God is beginning to braid the cord together. Think about it. All different colors, all different identities being bound together in one strong cord. And the differences aren't erased. No, they make up the strength of the cord. How do we begin to get there? As Kirsten read in 1 John, it happens as we live like Jesus lived. Again, it might sound pretty simple, but I think it's actually fairly profound. There was in my home church there in my hometown, Ed. Ed was one of a whole cadre of ushers in my home church. From the time I was probably in diapers till after I went to college and back, he was always there. Every Sunday morning. I don't remember a Sunday morning that he wasn't there. Ed welcomed you at the door. And as a little boy, sometimes as worship would start, he would lead me right outside to the bell tower and he would let me ring the church bell, calling people to come into this community of faith. He knew everybody's names and welcomed every single person by their name, what they did, asking what was going on during the week. And you know what was special about it? People told him. People actually honestly shared with him what was going on in their lives. Because Ed wasn't about some naive optimism. Ed was about grace and love. He had a heart for compassion and hospitality. He loved people into community as they were, not as some fake smiling person coming into church. He knew something about service. He knew something about what 1 John talks about. We know love by this, that Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for one another. The example that 1 John gives here about that laying down of life, that sharing of life is, how does God's love abide in anyone who has the world's goods and sees a brother or sister and yet refuses to help? Seeing a need, committing to help, bearing compassion and love. I remember one Sunday when I got old enough, my mom would let me come out of the pew and go and use the restroom at the church. And there was Ed in the narthex with a homeless man, taking some of the bread and cakes from coffee hour and sitting with him at a table and talking with him and sharing bread at that little card table in the narthex. As I think back on it, that may have been the holiest communion that I have ever seen. He loved people into community as Jesus did through his actions. Actions which revealed who he really was in Christ, revealed the truth about how Christ had gotten a hold of him and transformed him and his actions. John's gospel goes deeper into this braiding together, this strong cord where differences aren't extinguished, but they are celebrated as one strong cord. We offer ourselves, the Gospel of John says, for the sake of others. And that is always a deeply personal decision about how we do that. However, Jesus chose to offer his whole life for us so that we may have life and have it abundantly. Jesus says, "No one takes my life from me, but I lay it down on my own accord. I have the power to lay it down, and I have the power to take it up again." We call this offering of life on Jesus' behalf, the work of the Good Shepherd. I am the Good Shepherd, Jesus says. I know my own, and my own know me, just as the Father knows me, and I know my Father, and I lay down my life for my sheep. He lays down his life. And here's where the cord being braided together idea comes in. Jesus says that he lays down his life not just for the familiar sheep, but for the other unfamiliar sheep. Jesus says, I have other sheep that do not belong to this fold. I must bring them also, and they will listen to my voice. So there will be one flock and one sheep. The goal that Jesus has for all life, the goal that the Father has for all life, is unity within a wide-ranging diversity. One flock, one shepherd, many different sheep. Or, to take the cord imagery, many strands braided strongly into one. As I was thinking about this text this week, I couldn't help but flash back to the opening scene, always in that old sitcom, old now, seems still new to me, Cheers. When Norm would walk into the bar and everyone would shout, "Norm!" Now maybe we don't know everybody's name. And maybe we don't, like Ed, know the depth of everyone's circumstances. But what we do know is the Good Shepherd is at work creating an environment where at least the Good Shepherd knows everyone's name, probably what kind of beer they drink. But the Good Shepherd creates an environment in which you and I and all of us together can, in some small way, begin to sit around a table of difference, like a table I sat at in Chicago, and begin to talk about what is really real for people's lives, and not what's on the news channels or on a podcast or out there somewhere in social media, not that stuff that's out there that's driving us apart from one another, but the Good Shepherd leading us into a deeper unity in celebration of how we are all so different and yet one in Him. May this be a vision that gives us hope, especially over these next weeks and months where I fear the difficulties of our nation will be right in front of us, right in front of our face. Let us not have our hearts become cast down. Let us live with the image of the Good Shepherd in our mind and the work that he is doing among us and oftentimes despite us. May our actions reflect his actions in our world. And for that, I ask all the people to say, Amen.